We're going for real now.
Right, Chair, I can confirm we are now live on YouTube.
Okay, thank you. Right. Thank you all for attending today's meeting of the Environment and Community Panel. The Democratic Services Officer will now conduct a roll call to check who is present. And when she calls out your name, please switch your microphone on and confirm your attendance. That, of course, is supposing that you've now switched your microphones off. So it is now over to Becky for the roll call.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Banbridge.
Present.
Councillor Bauer.
Present.
Councillor Bubb.
Present.
Councillor John Collop, who is subbing for Councillor Wilkinson.
Present.
Councillor S. Collop.
Present.
We've had apologies from Councillor Kemp. So Councillor Kirk.
Present.
We've had apologies also from Councillor Lowe. Councillor Morley.
Present.
Yeah, and you're subbing for Councillor Bullen.
Correct.
Yes. Okay, Councillor Rust.
Present.
And you're subbing for Councillor Squire.
Yes, that's right. Thank you.
Councillor Rives.
Present.
Subbing for Councillor Kemp.
I believe so, yes.
Councillor Spikings.
Present.
And you're subbing for Councillor Lowe.
Yes.
Councillor DeWally.
Present.
And we've had apologies from Councillor Wilkinson. We also have Understanding Order 34, Councillor Bullen. Councillor Bullen?
Yes, I'm here until 4:30, sorry.
And Councillor Holmes, Understanding Order 34.
Yes, I'm present too.
Thank you. Then we also have portfolio holders, Councillor Dark.
Present. Good afternoon, everyone.
Councillor Coons.
Yes, present. Thank you very much.
Councillor Long.
Present.
And Councillor Knockholds.
Present.
And we also have in the meeting Councillor Devereux. Can you confirm, Councillor Devereux, are you planning on speaking under Standing Order 34?
I'd reserve my right to. Yes, please.
Okay, I'm not on the list. Okay, thank you, Chair. That's everyone.
Right, thank you very much. Welcome everybody within this bit of it and anybody else out there in YouTube land. Can I remind members that this meeting is being recorded and streamed live via YouTube. By attending this meeting, you're giving your permission to be recorded and streamed. Members, please ensure that your video is switched on during the meeting and microphones are off until you're invited either by me or anybody else to address the panel. If you're having connection issues which may require you to turn your camera off, can you please let us all know using the chat facility? If it comes to a vote on that item, I will ask you to confirm that you've heard all the debate before you cast your vote. If you need to get my attention during the meeting or would like to ask a question, please use the chat function and I will then invite you to address the panel at the appropriate time. Please do not interrupt other members or officers while they are presenting their reports. When addressing the panel, can you please state your name first so that all those present know who is speaking? Please speak clearly, concisely, and get straight to the point. If for any reason you need to leave the meeting early, please just let us know using the chat function. Right, so we've done apologies. We move swiftly on to the minutes of the previous meeting. You should all have read them. Has anybody got anything to say against what was written? Silence reigns supreme, so we will take them as a correct. Oh, sorry, Michael.
Thank you, Chair.
Just very quickly, I think I was quoted as saying made, which should have been make, and that was put into the recommendations anyway, but just a typo. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Apart from that, then we're happy with what was written. We will accept them then as a correct record, and at some point in the future, I will get round to signing them. Declarations of interest. If you have any, please put them forward now. Brian's got, and then obviously if you find it during the process of the meeting and you didn't realise, then mention it at that time. But first of all, we've got Brian.
Yes, Chair, mine's non-pecuniary, and it's obviously as county councillor, I'm appointed to the Great Ouse Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, but as I said, non-pecuniary. So.
Yeah. Ian.
Yes, Chair. I have an interest in item 8. I'm an Environment Agency coastal appointee for the same RFCC as the leader.
Okay, noted. And that's everybody, I think. Good. Okay. Urgent business, none at present. Members present under standing order, we've dealt with all them. Chairman's correspondence, none. So we can now move on to trying to see in half darkness. Climate Change Informal Working Group. This is purely in here so that I can mention the fact that the working group is comprised of councillors Holmes, Diwali, Bob, Hipperson, Kirk, Rust and Spikings. And they will start work in the new year when the group is formally put together, and they will then elect their chairman at that time. So we now move on to first big bit of the afternoon, which is the Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Update from the Environment Agency's perspective. And we've got Paul Burrows from the Environment Agency ready with his presentation. Paul, please come in.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and share my screen. Let's see if the technology... Has that worked?
Looks good.
Excellent. We're winning. So thank you for the invite, and it's great to be with you today. What I wanted to do for you is, first of all, I'll obviously introduce myself, but I wanted a bit of a sort of look back, look forward approach to today's session, talking about the work that we and partners are doing within the Borough Council's area and sort of beyond, but within the context of where the National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy is taking us. So that's kind of the theme for today's presentation and conversation. So just to introduce myself, and I know a few faces and names, but yeah, so I'm Paul Burrows. I am Flood and Coastal Risk Manager for the Environment Agency, based in Brampton within our East Anglia area, and I cover the River Great Ouse catchment. I've worked for the Environment Agency for 21-ish years, mostly in and around this catchment, albeit doing roles nationally and regionally as well. And I've been Flood and Coastal Risk Manager since 2014, so for a fair amount of time now. And it's fair to say that actually most of my proudest moments over the course of the last 6 years have been within the Borough Council's district. And I just want to sort of reflect on a few of those to start the ball rolling. Just trying to butter you all up for easier questions later, but it's genuinely true. So hopefully you can see that slide there. And I just really want to reflect firstly on the fantastic work that we've done to with you guys, and I think Peter's on the call, isn't he, Peter Germany, to turn the Wash East Coast Management Strategy into practice, and in particular the work that we've done around Unit C, and obviously the creation of the community interest company there to co-fund the works of the Shingle Bank that happen every year as well. That was an awful lot of energy, effort, and legal agreements to get that in place. And you know, that picture there with Henry Bellingham, Emma Howe-Boyd, who's the Environment Agency's chair, and obviously councillors Devereux and Long. It was a fantastic day to mark, I guess, the first set of annual recharge under that particular funding agreement as well. And it's fair to say, you know, that stretch of coast has played sort of true within certainly the last couple of years for me. So October last year, in fact, that when we had the last sort of tidal surge, near misses, but we issued the precautionary evacuation notice. If the wind hadn't changed, we would have been, you know, had a potential problem there. But actually, you know, I was fortunate enough. I don't know. I got media overload that over the course of those couple of days. So lots of media out on the coast, but it was absolutely fantastic to see all the work that goes on in preparedness in peacetime that then comes to fruition when we have to issue evacuation notices or respond to high tides there. So to see the multi-agency response on the ground with the council, the fire, the police, Environment Agency colleagues was absolutely brilliant, and a big kudos really to Kevin Kent at the Borough Council, who does a fantastic job and's got fantastic relationships with my team as well. And obviously in and around Kings Lynn, that becomes even more prominent with all the action that we need to do there with all the gates and the closures, and it was really great. I mean, I wasn't up at 5 o'clock the morning in that picture on the bottom left there, but that was James Wilde MP and the High Sheriff of Norfolk observing the sort of gate closure tests on an early Sunday morning tide, I think it was. I'm not sure, Ian, whether you were there as well. I can't remember, but it's it's fantastic to see how well drilled the teams are to keep Kings Lynn moving, you know, in the face of high tide. So some really fantastic moments there. A month after those set of high tides, where I was on the telly quite a bit, I suffered a stroke, and so I was off work for a couple of months there. Where I was incredibly lucky, and my first, I guess, my first public appearance, if you like, post-stroke, and I forced myself to this because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, was to join Councillor Long, your chief exec, at the opening of Wolverton pumping station, which is obviously there in the top left with Her Majesty the Queen. And it was one of those fantastic days, crowning days, that I'll remember forever. But it was really, really great because, you know, my team have been involved from day one with Kings Lynn IDB in developing that project, in supporting them with the investment package, facilitating, I think it was £1.5 million worth of grants to that scheme, and then obviously helping them deliver it in terms of issuing permits and, you know, the intricate work in combination with the Ingle outfall and the tidal bank there as well. And to have Her Majesty come on such a poignant day for her, given I think it was the anniversary of, was it when her father opened the original pumping station, and obviously her last public engagement before lockdown, you know, a day that we'll never forget. And it was fantastic there. Stood there for 90 minutes before she arrived, practicing bows and curtsies with your chief exec, and then making a hash of it when it came to the real life event. Bottom right there is Denver Sluice, and Denver Sluice for me, I don't know about you, but it's the heart, it's the centre of the water management world, not just the centre of the Fens. And so a lot of what I'll talk about later when I talk about the Fens is born out of my passion, that actually every time I go to Denver Sluice, I learn something new, and my passion ignites a degree or two even greater. That particular photo is standing on top of AG Wright or Head Sluice, so it might well be the highest point in the fens, who knows, with Stuart Roberts. I think he's president of the NFU now, and our work with the NFU and landowners is going to be absolutely critical in terms of the future of the fens, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. I'll move on to what I don't know how many of you know about the Islington pumping station that's currently in construction not too far from Wigan Hall St Germans. I'm sure Councillor Long knows all about it, but I'm not sure about everyone else. But for those that don't know, King's Lynn IDB are midway through construction of the biggest new build pumping station in England. It is the biggest value scheme that will be delivered by a drainage board within this capital spending programme. It's the highest value scheme within the Anglian Grade 2's RFCC's capital programme. I think £26 million. Again, from day one, we've been working with the IDB and their consultants to move this forward. It's been a massive challenge, huge learning curve all round. We've been able to facilitate and max out the government grant that's available for this scheme, which has obviously then reduced the financial burden on the IDB and obviously by default through to the council via its special levies to the IDB. I was really pleased to visit that in between lockdowns with a couple of my team who don't normally get out of the office. They're involved in sort of facilitating the grant payments and the programming side of things. So it was brilliant to see and awe-inspiring in terms of its scale. So it's certainly one that when lockdown eases and they can open up the site to visitors, I would really advocate you picking up the phone to the IDB and going to have a look around, because it's kind of a once in a lifetime event there as well. So it's a fantastic pride I take in a lot of the work that we've done within your district, actually. But things need to change. The Environment Agency have been with partners developing a new national flood and coastal erosion risk management strategy. This is a statutory document that we're required to develop under the Floods and Water Management Act. It sets out the ambition, roles and responsibilities looking ahead for all risk management authorities. So that includes the Borough Council. This particular document is an ambitious step change from its predecessor version, which was a little bit sort of sterile and focused on roles and responsibilities. This really embraces the future challenges ahead around how do we create a climate resilient nation. So how do we look longer term at our work as well? Obviously, climate change science is pretty irrefutable these days, and we do need a step change in approach. So not just thinking about carbon reduction, but about the resilience to flooding or the adaptation that we need to make in face of sea level rise as well. So alongside a new ambitious policy statement that DEFRA have recently published, this strategy really sets the tone moving forward. And currently there's an action plan in development and being engaged on within with national partners that will be published in April. The strategy ambitions are sort of articulated under three themes. One is around how do we create climate resilient places, and I'll talk a little bit about resilience and what that means in a moment. Talking about how infrastructure becomes resilient, you know, in future climate scenarios as well. I think there's some sort of shocking stat that 60% of UK households is served by infrastructure that is at some form of flood risk, which I think is pretty dramatic. And I'm sure in you know, in a location like King's Lynn, you know, right on the coast there, low-lying area, that stat is probably well, probably busts above that, doesn't it really? And then the third theme is about actually how as a nation do we come together to respond and adapt to flooding and coastal change as well. But coming back to resilience, I think what we're looking at within this strategy is a much clearer basket of options effectively when you consider resilience for places. You know, it's not going to be all about new defences, or it's not going to be all about maintenance of existing assets. Every community, every place needs a range of measures that work together to manage flooding and flood risk here and now, but also look to see how they evolve and adapt in future. And many of these we already have in place, in and around your council and with the work that we do on the coast as well. So a lot of this isn't alien. It's just bringing a new sort of framework around it as well, and being, I guess, more open and bolder to the fact that actually we cannot protect everywhere ad infinitum. So basket of measures, thinking about how we improve placemaking. So how do we influence and inform flood risk through the planning system? How do we better protect? How do we invest in flood assets? How do we continue them where they're needed? How do we maintain them? How do we respond? Our warning and informing work, how does that evolve as the climate changes? And if and when we do have flooding, how do we recover quickly? How do we get back to normal as well? And certainly, recent flooding on the coast in places like like Boston, actually in the 2013 tidal surge, and where we've seen low-lying flooding from Somerset levels and Wainfleet a couple of years ago, sort of brings home the nature of that recovery within a low-lying part of the world like King's Lynn is as well. So some key challenges that we need to build into our planning. Within all of that, we obviously have the ambition, I'm sure the Borough Council do as well, to get to net zero by 2030. So how do we do that in a part of the world where our flood and water infrastructure is heavily dependent on carbon pumping and concrete as well? So some key challenges for us all to work on there. I want to just talk now a bit locally about how we bring the national strategy to life within a local context for the Borough Council and some of the work we're doing. Just hold on while I sort of catch up with my notes, which I've got on my other screen. So the Anglian Flood Risk Management Plan is currently in development, and this plan will effectively be the vehicle to bring the national strategy to life for us locally. And within that plan, there are flood risk areas that have been identified, and we have two in your patch, one at King's Lynn, one in Hunstanton. There's been some engagement that I think, that I know Peter and other officers have been involved in recently, developing the actions that will go into the plan that goes out for consultation around those areas. And I'll probably touch on those a little bit later. But that flood risk management plan really starts to translate the national strategy and make it real for us locally. And it will sit neatly alongside the review or the health check of the Wash Shoreline Management Plan, which is underway at the moment. And I know Councillor Devereux tapped in to the coastal group there and helping inform that as well. In addition, Norfolk County Council are obviously lead local flood authority, and Councillor Long represents Norfolk County Council around the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee table, one of Brian's many hats, and Norfolk County Council's local flood risk management strategy really will need to translate the national strategy for local sources of flood risk, so for surface water, groundwater, flooding, and ordinary watercourse flooding as well. So working very closely with the IDB on that. In terms of then practically, what's that mean for us in terms of work we need to progress? Well, there will have to be at some point a next generation of the Wash East Coast Management Strategy. I think we're, 4 or 5 years into that 15-year strategy. Some interesting observations. I think we're losing less material than we originally anticipated, which is good because it means that the works cost less, and we've got greater reassurance that we might not need a beach recharge, certainly in the short term. But actually, what's behind that, and what does that mean then for 15 years beyond that and beyond that as well? So we do definitely need to play that through. And then big focus for us over the course of the last 2 or 3 years has been about the future the fens, and that's where I just want to spend some time with you on over the course of the next few slides, because it's really important work. And obviously I think a lot of the focus working with the council has been on either Kings Lynn frontage or Wash East frontage, not necessarily on the wider breadth of your borough. So I'll move on. So the Great Ouse Fens, so for the last 2 years, we've brought a technical group together, which includes the Water Management Alliance and Norfolk County Council, to help us move from a place where we're looking at flood investments in the fens kind of as individual organisations on quite a tactical basis, to actually what's the bigger picture, how does this look strategically? Because we know we've got lots of infrastructure out there. We know we've got assets that perform a variety of functions that different organisations own and manage, that are all ageing, and we know there are going to be massive funding gaps over the medium and long term. So what we decided to do was we needed to create an asset management evidence base that might help inform government policy, but also inform us all about what steps we might need to do to tackle that climate challenge and understand it better within the fens. So the fens, for me, when I look at the fens, I see some fantastic flood and water infrastructure that goes back 300 or 400 years. I feel really proud but slightly daunted to be a modern day custodian of that, especially given it's had such a challenging history, and certainly a complicated history and a controversial history in terms of the original drainage of the fens and what that meant for the sort of indigenous fenland communities and landscape as well. So really important that as we look forward, it's a case of how do we come together, recognizing there'll be competing demands, competing expectations, etc., and form the appropriate flood and water choices that are out there for the fens, that society can choose whichever they want as well. So lots of key challenges in the fens, and I'll just talk that through. So we've, like I said, we've been working on the plan in terms of baselining the existing asset base and understanding what that looks like from an economic and funding perspective. And I'll come on to that in a bit. But what we've been doing, recognizing that developing long-term choices for the fens will take probably 10 to 15 years to get to that stage, we need to continue that short-term investment in the fens, like your Wolverton pumping stations, like your Islingtons. And we now have some agreed tactical plans for the fens that we've been working on, particularly with the drainage boards. And what these provide is, I guess, the strategic approach that enables us to secure as much government grant as possible for those investments that are required in the short term in the fens, lots of which actually are within the Borough Council's area. Kings Lynn IDB has the biggest capital programme, I think, of any IDB that I've seen, and certainly if you layer on Islington and Wolverton on top of that, so real considerable challenge actually. But those assets don't work in isolation from your tidal embankments or from anything else, so we need that bigger picture. But the investment picture over the course of the next 15 years for the whole of the Great Ouse Fens is that £237 million worth of investment is needed, of which probably about 157 can come from government grants. So we've got about an £80 million funding gap, some of which actually will be catered for through IDB's normal funding regimes that come from obviously special levies from yourselves and from agricultural ratepayers. But what we've now got with this 15-year tactical plan is actually a much better mutual understanding of the investment required that enables ourselves and the IDBs, working with the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee and the councils accordingly, to better investment plans, certainly at least over the short term, which I would hope that the council would value considerably. But this is all, as I said, leading towards how we tackle and face the long-term objectives. So yeah, we're in phase one at the moment. We're currently towards the end of a baselining stage, which I'll share some high-level results with you in a minute. We need to create some visualization around that to make it real for people, and at the same time scope up what this long-term adaptation plan looks like for the fens, and that might take over 5 or 10 years before we get to a stage of delivering different flood infrastructure choices in the locality. So let me move on. So we have a baselining report which is in advanced finalisation and should be available early in the new year. We've had a bit of headaches actually trying to finalise it, but I'm working on the premise I want it to be right rather than rushed. So this will be a baselining document that will document the history of the fens from a water management perspective, and try and create a common understanding of actually how the fens operate from a water management perspective. Everyone has a slightly different flavour and perspective on it, so hopefully we can get that down in one place, and then we can draw some visualization tools modelling around that as well. What we have done is drawn flood asset and investment information together from all risk management authorities. We've looked at the economics, we've played it through government's partnership funding calculator, which is the mechanism to work out how much government grants investments can draw versus how much funding needs to come from other beneficiaries, and yeah, played this through some thinking as well. So we've looked at a number of different scenarios in terms of water level if you were to turn off the pumps and stuff like that. So the report will look at different economics at different scenarios of flooding within the fens. We've calculated that there is where am I? The total benefits for the do minimum scenario. So what we talk about within this baselining exercise is firstly looking at a do nothing scenario. So basically stop pumping, stop maintaining banks. And that we have to do that from an economic appraisal perspective. It's not a scenario anyone will adopt, but we have to look at that as our baseline. And we've looked at the do minimum option, which is just about keeping the existing assets at their existing level or existing pumping capacity for the next 100 years. In doing that, we recognise we've come up with the fact that there's £17.1 billion worth of benefits associated with our current flood assets, and they protect about 32,000 households, 4,500 commercial and industrial properties, and about 134 hectares of agricultural land as well. Sorry, so lots of benefits out there, and the pie charts and the report will go into more detail about how those benefits look in terms of different categories, both from households, commercial, agriculture, highways, railway, etc., etc. We've looked in greater detail than you would do in a traditional appraisal, because the fens and our flood infrastructure there does enable things like the water transfer to Essex, and Denver's key within that. There's a big gas line apparently that's underground across the fens as well. And we've taken a look at isolated properties. So all of this looks at those properties that are directly impacted, but as well as I do, lots of islands in the fens where you've got houses built traditionally higher up that if the worst happened would be cut off. So they're not at direct flood risk, but clearly the ability to sustain habitation would be challenged under a do nothing scenario. So we've calculated some economics around that. This is looking more at costs. So what we've then done is we've looked at, we've drawn together the capital and maintenance costs for all infrastructure with IDBs, councils, ourselves, and then worked out what that might be to sustain existing standards over the next 100 years, and looked at that in comparison to the benefits. And what it does, and it's fair to say, and I know Brian's, Councillor Long's initial reaction to this around the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee challenge, it draws out some uncomfortable truths actually about the cost of our asset base versus the benefits. And a lot of this isn't really surprising, but it is, it's quite stark when you see it. So we've split the fens into a number of, well, 5 management units, and the report will go into the economics around each of these as well. So you can chew that over when the report's out there. But what it does show is quite a disparity, actually, where we've got places like the middle level and the west of Ouse, where actually we've got high benefits and lower costs of an asset base, versus the south level, east of Ouse and Kings Lynn, where we've got high cost asset bases, but actually not benefits that don't really punch the weight in terms of maximising a proportion of government grants within that as well. So some really interesting and challenging patterns there that we need to chew over, how that then plays into our own investment planning and also scoping of this long-term adaptation, because that's what it looks like just for sustaining current standards. If we're talking about future choices for major infrastructure, say in the south level or Kings Lynn, then that challenge will be even greater. So none of this is really surprising, because if you think back to how the Ely Ouse flood protection scheme was conceived on the back of the major flooding in the 1930s and 40s, that resulted in what would now be a 200-300 million pound scheme. And it was only because of that massive breaching that government put their hand in their pockets and created a special case for investment. But that was on the back of tragedy. So how do we not get to the point where we wait for tragedy to invest in these assets that we now have a legacy of, built off the back of that 60 years ago? And when you think about Kings Lynn, and I was on a really interesting session with is it Ivor Rowlands at the Guildhall, talked about the history of Kings Lynn there, pre-drainage of the fens, and the frontage in Kings Lynn effectively used to be the river, and the river was moved. So it's not surprising that actually lots of the benefits, or lots of those places at flood risk within Kings Lynn town itself are actually on higher ground. So those 60 odd gates with, I think, a 100-year cost to sustain them, I think it's about 97 million pounds. Actually, they enable Kings Lynn to be the fantastic place it is, but actually what they directly protect is actually quite limited. So there's real challenge that we need to face together in terms of that. And I'll just sort of summarize that in terms of looking forward. Sorry, just clear my throat a little bit there. So our fens work, I'll just read out some stats from our fens work, and then we'll talk in particular around Kings Lynn and Hunstanton. So for the fens work, there's 17,000 households directly protected from flooding, of which 130,000 are in the study area. More than 2,850 businesses are directly protected from flood risk, supporting over 70,000 jobs. Flood risk management across the Great Ouse Fens over the next 100 years will cost in excess of 1.8 billion, accounting for capital works, operation and maintenance of over 300 assets, allowing that there is no improvement to the current standard of service that those assets provide. And with that in mind, partnership funding contributions of between 810 and 890 million are likely to be required over the next 100 years to sustain the current standards of service. When we talk about climate change and sea level rise, so at the moment, about 33% of the Great Ouse Fens is below sea level. And latest climate change projections are talking about a sea level increase at Kings Lynn of between 0.44 and 0.77 metres by 2100. And if you play that across the Fens topography, that means that by 2100, 2/3 of the Great Ouse Fens will be below sea level. And so you just think about the increased pressure that will bring on all those raised embankments that we have at the bottom end of the catchment as well. So, real challenge there. And within Kings Lynn itself, you think about how that, we know the operation that's required, don't we, when certain levels are hit, and what that means in terms of what happens on the frontage in terms of gate closures and stuff like that. What we need to understand is actually how does climate change already change, that likely impact, as well as think about, okay, what's the next generation of defences for King's Lynn. So that's going to be a particular challenge that I think we definitely need to face. But equally is the challenge that will happen at places like Denver, which is obviously our tidal defence and protects the Eels part of the catchment from tidal flooding. And with that challenge of sea level rise comes challenges at Denver in terms of saline intrusion. And what does that then mean for agriculture up in the Eels and Cam? What does it mean for water transfer to Essex? Our ability to gravity discharge will be hindered by sea level rise. So at the moment at Denver, I think with a fair wind, we can gravity discharge 60% of the time. But that will reduce to 30% within 100 years. And gravity discharge, for those that don't know, is the key mechanism currently to control and manage siltation in the Great Ouse Tidal River, because the natural flushing of silt through managing Denver Sluice is hugely crucial there as well. So again, that will be another challenge that we need to face. And what we've done, so I just want to come back before I finish, and I recognise that that's an awful lot to go through, just finding my notes again. So this picture formed part of the conversations that colleagues had around those flood risk areas of King's Lynn and Hunstanton that I talked about earlier in terms of the flood risk management plan. So I think council officers will have had some playback of draft actions as a result of those sessions. And within that, we are talking about, yes, we having a look at this evidence, we need to build actions within our flood risk management plan that then come forward to the capital programme around things like, reviewing the Wash East Coast Management Strategy, the what next for King's Lynn defences question, is your planning policy right, for and fit for this climate future that we're describing here as well. So both in King's Lynn and Hunstanton, I think that flood risk management plan will be a really important mechanism to make this really real and build collaborative plans around the future within your borough council. So I'm going to pause there. I'm shattered after going through all that, and I'm desperate for a pint of water that I've got sat at my right hand side. So thank you, Chair. Hopefully that was clear, and I'm more than happy to take any questions.
Okay, Paul, thank you very much indeed. We're going to have deep pockets, aren't we, everybody? Deep pockets and deep channels. Do we have any, I was going to say relatively simple questions, but I don't think any of this is relatively simple. So we'll just go with questions. Leslie, you look like being first.
Thank you. Mine is a
Ellie,
simple question.
Joe.
Thank you. Mine is a simple question because it's about trees. I noticed from the photographs, I know that's at the Wash, but on the other photographs of rivers and drains, we don't have any trees. Trees are known to help stabilise banks, and they act as a buffer zone and can reduce the rate of erosion. Is the Environment Agency going to work with other organisations, possibly Norfolk County Council, to plant trees along riverbanks?
Yeah, trees in the right places, so and on the right banks. I think that's the critical thing. I'm not sure how raised embankments that face the full force of a tide will be bolstered by trees. But certainly in the upper parts of catchments, they'll be absolutely crucial moving forward. So if you're thinking about some of the river systems we've got outside of the fens and the lowland environments, and I think that there's definitely a step change that we need to do right across the board around that, and that's that is within our thinking, and it's within some of the early thinking, certainly when you think about the changes that will come in with the change in agricultural payments as we head out of the EU with the environmental land management scheme. So there's definitely lots more we can do there, but equally in terms of that, I guess, offsetting conversation as well, and how we work as collaborative authorities to focus efforts so we can collectively hit net zero, I think is really, really important. But yeah, we've certainly had some interesting initial approaches actually about, can we plant trees in places where it's like, no, because that's in the middle of a flood storage reservoir. So there's definitely a shared understanding we need about what's the art of the possible and what's appropriate for different environments around that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Tony, I think you were next, then Joe, then Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Most of the coastal part of the borough is a tourist attraction. Now, you try and keep the water out and people like to come and sit on the beach. How do you weigh up the balance between what you do and what you don't do to put people off coming to use the beaches?
Yeah, no, that's always the challenging position, and certainly that's some of the conversations we've been having around Unit B. So that's the Hunstanton frontage there, where we've got the groin field that is in dual ownership. Actually, we own some groins. The Borough Council owns some groins. We can only draw investment for flood risk purposes. So if investment is required for flood risk purposes that then complements, creating a nice beach environment, that's brilliant. That's the panacea. But actually, if those groins are only needed to create a beach level that then makes the beach attractive for tourists, that isn't something that we can access grant for. So I think the key is just understanding the different drivers that we have, and 9 times out of 10, I'm hopeful they'll complement. But in cases where they don't, we just need to be open with what we can and can't invest in. But there's a pretty strict appraisal process about how government funding for flood gets invested in flood benefits, and anything over and above that needs to be funded differently.
Okay. Right. You, Joe, yeah, fire away.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul, for your really interesting and informative presentation. I noticed that you said we cannot protect everything ad infinitum. So if we recognise that at a local level and we have to make tough decisions over what areas can be and will be protected, what happens if at a national level they also come to that same conclusion that the government can't protect everything ad infinitum, and we are that area that they say the cost benefits don't balance with the the amount, because it's a huge amount that we need to secure the safety of our future. So, is there any, and we have talked about flood risk, I've mentioned Councillor Devereux's own area, so it's a great concern to everybody. What is the likelihood that we as an area are going to be that area that the government says we can't protect everything ad infinitum?
So no, that's a good question, and I think I just want to try and clarify what actually the government's role is, and what the Environment Agency's role is within that. So, government will set the policy, etc. What they won't do is go, well, that area's okay, that isn't, and stuff like that. They'll set the framework, and then it's up to the Environment Agency with other partners to effectively implement it. And what won't happen is that someone in my organisation sat somewhere in Bristol or London goes, you know what, Hunstanton, you've got no chance of future investment. That won't happen. What my role is, working with colleagues in different authorities, is to create the flood choices for the future. Okay, so bring the evidence together, understand what the choices are. Now, there might be some choices which aren't viable from an engineering perspective, but actually whether and there'll be choices that have different levels of government funding that can be drawn towards them. Now, whether they are then affordable locally is kind of down to society to decide. So yeah, the fundamental principle is, I won't be coming going, that's the only option you can have. We'll be going, actually, here's a range of options that are, I guess, viable from an engineering perspective, an environmental perspective, whatever it is, and here are the costs associated with those. Which one do you want to buy? but some will cost more than others. And as was said earlier, deep pockets may be needed, but actually if you plan early enough and understand what those choices might be over 100 years, actually you might find actually it's not that deeper pockets that's needed. It might just be a different way of investing or banking for the future might be needed. And that's the type of thing that we need to come together to formulate, especially as we look across the fens there and see such, quite a disparity of where the investment challenges will be greater than elsewhere.
Okay. Chris Morley.
Yeah, I'm here.
You're there.
I don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks very much. People like to speak in tricolons these days. Yours is kind of protect, drain, discharge. And yet 3-4 months ago, we had a presentation from, I can remember, Water Resources East, the Managing Director of Water Resources East, who was thinking more of restore, retain and hold. And the Environment Agency have said that by 2040, this country will be water in deficit of water supply. So the climate change has got two arms to it, hasn't it? Flooding on one side and drought on the other. So what are your tactical, what are your above tactical, let's say what your 2035 onwards strategic plans are to harmonise these two issues?
Yeah. No.
Can you get the water, can you drive the water back into North London or the Midlands rather than just discharge it and then pay for the centre of the country to buy water from Scotland or somewhere?
Yeah, so that's a really good point. And if you digest DEFRA's flood policy statement and the national strategy I referred to, it talks about that join up across, I guess, flood and drought, too much water versus too much or too little water. So for the last 18 months since Water Resource East became an entity, they've been part of our technical group around the fens. So we've been working very closely with them to try and get the ducks in a row to tackle these questions head on. So you're absolutely right. So there's a real balance within the Great Ouse catchment of drainage, of conveyance and attenuation. And what we don't understand is what that balance looks like over different climate scenarios, but also different housing growth scenarios that affect the whole of the Great Ouse catchment. So that's some evidence, sister evidence work that we're doing in terms of storage and conveyance there as well. Part of what we're doing with Water Resource East as well is working with them on their water resource management plan, so that the evidence we've generated from a flood perspective can play into that, so we can see what flood infrastructure is needed to enable future water resource challenges and where the pressure points might be. So I mentioned earlier that Denver's a key stress point for us from a flood perspective for a whole variety of reasons looking forward. Well, Denver is absolutely critical for, I can't even remember the percentage of South Essex's water through the transfer scheme. So immediately there's a big question mark there. We know, so just to come in on your principle, effectively this is more about actually how we get more water to this part of the world from elsewhere rather than getting water from here elsewhere as well. So yeah, that whole transfer, how do we maximize the availability of water within the Great Ouse catchment? How do we think about whether we can get more water into the Great Ouse catchment, either through the middle level system from the Nene and the Midlands, or from the I can't remember, it's from the Grand Union Canal via potentially a new waterway connecting Bedford and Milton Keynes. So there's a whole variety of real big infrastructure conversations going on. But you're right. Traditionally, water resources and flood management would be dealt with in silos. So it is a bit of a clash of culture, and we are learning lots of things. And the one thing is for certain, it's going to be blooming challenging.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. Thanks.
Okay, Chris. Tom.
Hi, two queries. Thanks, Chair. Thanks for that very good presentation, Paul. That was very informative. I've just got two questions. First one is on the financial side. It seemed to be, looking at your diagrams, that the bulk of the unfunded requirement lies in King's Lynn and South Level. and I did a quick calculation, that seemed to be about £160 million of funding required. Is it realistic to suggest that perhaps this borough is going to become responsible for a significant percentage of that? And I don't know if that's a sum based over a 100-year period or what the time frame for that investment requirement might be.
Yeah, so I mean, this is a real high-level assessment. So what we've done is looked at our known capital investment requirements over the and then sort of modelled that over 100 years, and that again, that's just to keep things ticking along. Clearly, what we need to do is use this information to then inform an investment strategy and approach that works from a timing of investment perspective. You know, a lot of this isn't necessarily, a lot of this will be informed by what the future choices are. So there'll be places here that no doubt we all want to and aspire to create stronger defences that are resilient to climate change and evolve with climate change. Well, that's great, but that's going to change the nature of the funding requirements there. How we work on that as public bodies with, and I guess, what's the word, try and enable our yield our respective power, if you like, to bring funding packages together from the breadth of people who benefit from that investment is something we definitely need to do. You know, DEFRA introduced their partnership funding policy back in 2011, and this year's the end of our first sort of 6-year capital investment programme. The bulk of partnership funding that's been brought in has been from other public sources, so it's just our recycling of public money. How do we make public money investment in this as simple as possible so that we can target investment from private sector beneficiaries to really complement, because there's a real step change of investment needed across the whole programme across the country. So it'll be really competitive trying to secure sufficient grants. So we need to be really bold around the investment approaches we take, and part of this is where the visualization comes in, because I mean, I think we all know, certainly if you look across the East Coast and some of the work that New Anglia LEP have funded, for example, in major places of risk across the East. Well, actually, how do we mirror that in places where actually we've got strong existing defences but big future questions as well, and how do we think innovatively about that? So no preconceived ideas about how much the Borough Council needs to think about, but actually there'll be some evidence that comes out of this report that will get you thinking about that scale. And I know Councillor Long, we've had this conversation, haven't we, multiple times around the committee table about, you know, the level of investment required and the level of funding from Kings Lynn Borough Council's current regime, if you like, that goes towards flood risk, either with the IDB or with the Environment Agency, and stuff like that. So yeah, there's definitely a strategy that can be developed out of this that I think it would be better being eyes open to rather than closed off to.
Thank you. It seemed to me, looking again at your presentation, that you had 5 circles representing 5 areas, and the only 2 which had the large deficit requirement or the funding requirement seemed to be those 2, Kingston and the South. So the others are, you think, funded. Why might it be that our funding requirement is so large?
No, it's lots of high cost assets versus the benefits. Okay. So the report will drill into the detail of that. Fine. So if you think about Kings Lynn, for example, 61 floodgates, so lots of assets that will need lots of investment to keep them ticking over the course of the next 100 years. If you think about South Level, you've got Ely's flood protection scheme, like I said, that was justified on the back of disaster with a special case from government, that before that couldn't have been funded through a normal funding route. So you got big structures there, but you don't have the nature of the benefits to justify that investment, and that's kind of that's the purpose of this baselining exercise, is to understand that. So yeah, definitely drill into the detail when you get it, and yeah, we've drawn together quite a number of expert economists within this, and just, I didn't mention it as well, we've taken a different look on the valuation of agricultural land as well. So one of the key, I guess, challenges that the NFU have had whenever we've talked about the fens before has been, oh, you don't value agricultural land sufficiently robustly. So that's part of the reason we're trying to draw this together as an asset management challenge. But within it, we've worked with the NFU to trial a different approach to agricultural land value, and that will play out in the report as well. And we might, well, I'm sure the NFU will be using that to try and challenge, well, to challenge and influence government policy moving forward as well.
Okay, thank you. If I could just ask a question on planning, is that okay, Chair, if I ask a second question?
I thought that was the second one, but yes, okay.
All right, the third question. What sort of, I mean, what are your views on the way we sort of integrate flood risk into our own criteria for our own planning process? I ask because I am on the planning panel, and I sometimes do wonder that it sort of almost gets pushed to one side. You know, as individual councillors, sometimes we don't know enough, and sometimes I think we don't get the guidance we clearly are going to need, because you're talking about very big things, and sometimes we don't always see those.
I think this is a real challenge, isn't it? And you know, you only need to look at the development between those two lines of shingle bank along unit C there, and the, you know, the caravans in there. And obviously, I think with the sort of COVID lifting of the temporary restrictions, you know, decisions about about putting people into risky areas. But there's a real challenge, isn't there, within planning policy when we don't know what this long-term future is. How do you know what steps you need to make now to enable that in future? And certainly, you know, from Wash East is the part of this coast that I know probably I've got the most about. And you just go, well, okay, we've got a 15-year management approach there. We know that businesses and the community want stronger, more permanent defences on that unit, but that will come at a huge cost. Are you willing and able to pay for them? And if you're not, what other mechanisms do you need to take in that resilience toolkit of recovery, respond, placemaking to enable that to happen? So I guess my question would be is how do you use this emerging evidence once it comes out, and as we develop towards, you know, phase 2 and thinking about what the strategic appraisal is, how do you build that in to your planning thinking early enough? And how do you bring adaptation and resilience into your thinking around climate change within the council, so that, you know, there's 3 strands to tackling the climate emergencies, and there's carbon and carbon net zero, there's resilience to flooding, and there's adaptation. So really, I would encourage the council to consider 3 themes within your strategy, but recognise that when we're talking about coastal change, it's really tough, really emotive, and it's kind of permanent, isn't it? When you think about adaptation there as well. So, yeah.
Do you think there could be a fourth aspect, which is the movement of people away from areas which you perceive to be at risk?
Well, that's adaptation. That's adaptation. Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we've got another subject for another day there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
A one-item agenda, I think. Right, we've got Michael and then Andy, and I know Andy wants to get away fairly soon, so we'll call a line under it after him. Okay, so Michael, all yours.
Would Andy like to go first if he's got time pressures?
That's kind of you, Councillor.
Okay, thank you.
Paul, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm interested in the potential of natural silting up of the Wash, whether there's any evidence of that and how it might impact on flood protection. At Gore Point in Hunstanton, salt marshes are evidence of growing, and there's anecdotal evidence in Stedisham Sailing Club that they are now restricting sailing because of the levels rising. And I just wonder whether there's any proof of silting up in the Wash, and whether that has any impact on any plans looking ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's our observations, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of the work we need to do annually on the sort of Snettisham Hunstanton frontage. So, and that's one of the reasons when we look to review the Wash East Coast Management Strategy jointly with you. One of the reasons is to, you know, take stock on what the reality is. Yeah, I've probably got the same questions about, is that a temporary pattern? Is it long term? I'm sure Councillor Devereux has the same questions, and we definitely need to build that into any actions that come out of the shoreline management plan. Because certainly when we're talking about long-term choices for flood management in the whole catchment, and you think about the importance of the wash from an ecological, environmental perspective. So it's very, very sensitive, isn't it? But obviously siltation are there, could be a real issue for the King's Lynn as a navigable port. So anything we do in and around that environment needs some very careful thought with the right evidence behind it. So yeah, I've probably got the same questions as you on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Paul. Very enlightening and very helpful presentation. Forgive my ignorance. I just want to check my understanding of things. So you're saying that you are putting together a 15-year management approach in 3 phases, and that's with a view to protecting us up to 2100. And you gave us projections for sea level rise between 0.44 and 0.7 meters, or 0.77 meters. Now, to me, as my understanding, these are fairly optimistic projections, working on the assumption that we can tackle our carbon emissions. The less optimistic projections are considerably worse. So I guess my first question is what flexibility are you hardwiring into the strategy to ensure that we can tackle the worst predictions as we get closer to the times, if they actually come to pass. My other 2 questions, if it's okay, is what.
Can I answer those first? Otherwise, I'll forget.
Please, certainly. Thank you.
My brain can't cope with more than 2 questions at once. So
no, that's fine.
Okay. So I'll correct your first point just for the avoidance of doubt. So we've now got tactical plans in place for the next 15 years, which is all about the investments required to sustain existing standards of service. And that's buying us time whilst we develop this long-term adaptive plan for the next, to take us to 2100, basically. So that's the first point. In terms of the sea level rise, climate change point, you're absolutely right. And what I will do is I will quote a chap who I was privileged to hear at a lecture at our Flood and Coast conference a couple of years ago. It's a chap called John Englander, who is a American expert on climate change. He's written a fantastic book, which I've got upstairs. I should have brought down, and I should have foreseen the question. But basically, he boils it down. So scientists, and this is me articulating what he said, scientists will only publish what they can absolutely prove. So you're absolutely right. Those climate change projections are what climatologists will stand behind. But there is the big unknown about what happens in Antarctica, which is very much dependent on how well the world, reduces carbon emissions. So John Englander's advice that he gave to us as society was not to get overly bogged down in whether it's this centimetre or that centimetre. He said, look, what you can do, you should be planning for a metre, acting for a metre, meters sea level rise, and then planning for a further 1 metre. And if you take that principle, you won't be too far wrong. That was his advice. So absolutely what we need to do when we think about, long-term strategic choices is build sufficient bandwidth into things. So as and when our understanding of what actual sea level rise will be changes, we haven't gone too small, so to speak.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. May I ask further questions, please, Chair?
Yes. Thank you.
Right, now there's a great debate going on as to whether we should relinquish some of the fenland to wetland, because it then becomes a carbon sink rather than producing carbon as the peat oxidizes and dries. And there are those who say that the agricultural productivity won't last much more than 50 years in some parts of the fens. Should we be looking towards converting it to wetland now? And if so, how much and what plans are there in place to do so?
Well, the Great Fen is already looking to achieve that, isn't it, and move in that direction. So for those that don't know, that's reconnect, or that's the ambition to reconnect Wood, Walton and Home Fen outside of the borough's district. So they're already got movement in that direction. And within that project, they're trialling different methods of wet farming. And I know places in Lincolnshire, I think, are trialling different methods of saline resilient farming as well. So there's lots of things going on, but you're absolutely right. This is the type of question that needs to play into phase two thinking, really, as well. It's one of those points that's going to be hugely controversial, isn't it? And has been, actually, if you play back right through the history of the fens, very, very much, built on Vermoyd and the Earl of Bedford's first, drainage of the fens at the expense of, the indigenous population there and stuff like that. So what we need to do is be as open-minded as we can about what future choices there might be and where those all play together right across the fens for best effect, recognizing that actually we've all got slightly different interests in and around the fens. But it'll be a case of, one of the key things is understanding for me what changes in agriculture. What are the other changes that will happen over the next 100 years that will drive different flood and water management choices? Do we know enough about all of those to then be able to nail our colours to the mast about the type of next generation flood infrastructure we need? I'm not 100% sure. So how do we plan and move forward with that level of uncertainty?
Yeah, good answer.
Thank you. One last very slightly obtuse question, for which I ask apologies. In York, the other ooze inundated the pumping station and rendered it unusable when it was most needed. What flood resilience or what resiliency are you putting into the new pumping stations, please, in case of such an event?
Yeah, so, well, not sure I can answer that from a technical perspective, but the very different catchments and things like that. So that interaction between the foss and the ooze is really quite complicated within catchments where the spate of water is quite significant. So very different to what we see in and around our fens pumping infrastructure. So certainly when you look at Islington, if you ever go there, and Wolverton, they've all got fail safes and different levels of pumping that means that they can operate in combination, and then they get tested accordingly. And certainly what we've got within the IDB network, we're kind of blessed with our IDB network in that water can go different ways and different places. One of the things that we're probably hoping to do, that we need to do actually as part of the fens thinking moving forward, is in these places where we know it's going to be more difficult to invest because the benefits aren't as great versus the cost of investment, is then have we got the right contingency, incident response and recovery plans for the communities and the land around those assets. So that's one piece of work that I think we definitely need to build into our action planning moving forward. But at the moment, we've got contingency plans around our major fens assets. Certainly the Environment Agency holds, we've got contingency pumping arrangements for Welsh's Down, where we can bring in a temporary pump to do all sorts of things as well. So yeah, we're quite targeted, but proportionate to the risk.
Thank you very much indeed. Brilliantly answered.
Okay, that's good. Brian just wanted to put in there that Wolverton can work with a meter round it. So that takes us a little bit further down the time scale. Now I've got one more question. This really is the last one from Ian.
Good afternoon, Paul. Super presentation. You know the question I'm going to ask. Excellent work done within the Great Ouse catchment. but I perceive the WASH as a large coherent system, and it is what are our adjacent authorities doing to address the similar issues in our co-located flood defences.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So when you think about the WASH and the fens, that doesn't start and stop at the end of a sort of fictitious catchment boundary. And so what we are doing with our colleagues in neighbouring operational area is joining up around the fen. So they are doing similar baselining work, but at a slightly different timescale. But when it comes to phase 2 long-term adaptation, we need to come together around that. And likewise, in terms of the work coming out the WASH, traditionally our predecessors have focused on, what's in their remit, and then you have actually different standards of service, don't you, that start and stop on some of the WASH banks there, which was before we were a national organisation. But what I'd really ask actually is that, Ian and colleagues, you've got the ability to really champion that working together with other authorities, with your neighbouring authorities. So really use your weight to challenge Norfolk County Council, the Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, ourselves. Have you got the right links with neighbouring district councils as well to make this happen? I think we've all got a shared responsibility to face this strategically rather than as an insular thing within one authority or another.
Okay, well, we'll take from that you have given us full opportunity to browbeat anybody around us who we don't think is really pulling their weight. Paul, thank you very much indeed. There's been one hell of a lot of information in there. The implications are huge, but thank you for the update. I think if we'll give you a rest for some months, and perhaps sometime later next year, we'll have a chat and see if there's any further information. But we'll leave it for a while anyway, because obviously you've got plenty in there, and it ain't going to happen tomorrow.
No, so just to add, we've got a session with our technical group, I think next week, where we need to develop an engagement plan for once this report lands. We are a little strapped for engagement resource. We will need to all come together that and plan to deliver what we can. But so absolutely, if the council have comms and engagement people that want to play into this agenda, brilliant. I think it's got to be a team effort.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. I think probably after today you need a cup of tea or possibly something stronger.
Am I able to leave now?
You may go. Yes. Thank you very much.
Cheers, everyone. Take care.
And you. Right. Got to rearrange my screen a bit because we seem to have, I've got all sorts of different things now. And that gets confusing, which is not difficult for me. I think I've got enough there. Right. We will now move on to item 9, which is temporary event notices and COVID. We've got Vicky Hops, who's coming to tell us what it entails, and Martin Chisholm will also talk to us. And depending what comes out of that, there may be another strand to this item, but we'll let the first bit go and see where we end up. So Vicky, all yours.
Thank you, Chair. Can you all hear me?
I think so.
Good, excellent. I see lots of nodding heads. I normally use Teams, so Zoom's a bit new to me. Yeah, okay. So the reason for me attending this and having this on is because there's been a lot of questions recently in relation to what we can and can't do in relation to TENS, temporary event notices, and also the Licensing Act as well. It's come across because of events that have occurred during the summer with COVID restrictions in place. So within the framework of the Licensing Act, there's a system for permitting temporary events, which is classed as a light touch approach. They don't need to go through the full licensing process. And as such, the events, it's mainly the event organizer giving notice to the council to say that they're going to hold an event. These are these then get sent to the police and the environmental health, who may have objections to this, but these are the only two responsible authorities who can comment on such events. And again, the 4 licensing objectives would need to be covered. If they are going to make an objection, it would have to be under one of the 4 licensing objectives, which is the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm. What it doesn't cover in this instance is public health, which is where COVID and COVID restrictions, etc., would fall under. So that for the purposes of TENS and for the purposes of the Licensing Act, public health is not covered, and they're not classed as a statutory consultee. Although it does state that public safety is covered, this is mainly to do with safety, as in not in health. So making sure risk assessments in place that people aren't going to get injured or harmed. We've also spoken to our legal advisors from East Law, and that is what they agree as well. And that's they've confirmed that us as the local authority are unable to object under COVID or public health or the public health remit. The LGA have published a guidance note in October, again stating that health and safety legislation should be used regarding COVID, and that events of up to 499 people can still go ahead if COVID's secure. Health and safety would only step in if there was an imminent risk to health. There's a lot of this falls back onto health and safety, but it's really difficult to use health and safety legislation in relation to COVID. In terms of the Director of Public Health at County, she's able to step in and make a direction under the number 3 regulations, which prevents or can prevent activities going ahead. We do, with the new regulations, have additional powers and additional notices which we can use, which would be in terms of gatherings and non-social distancing within premises. But again, we would be unable to use these prior to the event of a 10. We would have to use it while the event was being carried out. And often when you've got 499 people there, the best thing to do is to let it run its course, provided it's done safely. Otherwise, we'd need police assistance and what have you to disperse the gathering. We've also challenged the government on this, but we still haven't had any response. The letter was sent to the DCMS in September, and we're still waiting for information to come back. Our colleagues at North Norfolk sent the letter, but we haven't actually had anything back in relation to what we can, what they would allow us to do to sort of like have delegated powers in relation to issuing TENS and granting TENS. That's it from me. It's very short and sweet. I don't know if there's anybody who's got any questions.
I may.
Yeah, sure.
That's better.
Sorry.
I was going to say, I think we probably ought to let Martin have his bit on this first, Tom, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure, whatever is best.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Purpose of being here aside, being part of this meeting as normal, is to answer any questions that fall outside of the 10 licensing process. Vicky's explained the 10 situation, so with your leave, Chair, I'll just answer any questions that perhaps fall over the edge as they arise.
Yes, if everyone's happy with that.
Sorry, may I proceed to some questions, or I'm not quite sure.
Martin has indicated he's happy to take the question.
Okay. Can I ask? I've got a number of questions, and I don't want to monopolise the panel's time. If I can talk just quickly about COVID, just more of an observation. I can see it's a huge issue, but there are 2 aspects from the point of view of a rural community. There's first of all the kind of the gathering together of a large number of people in a small space, and my experience of these matters relates to kind of rave type events and music type events, and so there are a lot of people moving around. There's a lot of sort of shouting and yelling. There's a lot, there's a high moisture content in the air, so that makes it a sort of potentially very dangerous environment. That I think we all understand. The second thing which causes a lot of concern in the rural community is that large numbers of people come in, normally younger people, from outside areas, and integrate and mix with that community. So those are the two aspects where we, in rural areas have a huge concern about the propensity of events to continue at times of the pandemic. I don't know if there's any comment you want to make on
that. Was that a question or was that just a comment?
Okay, well, no, it's just an observation. Right, if I can then move into the 10 area generally. I speak from experience because, as you're aware, we have this a series. Well, we had an event and then a license application in Northwold, and I understand.
Tom, I have to stop you completely from mentioning that. It's in the process of being looked at legally, and we cannot pass comment because some of the people here are part of the process.
Can I talk about 3 issues which arise from my experience of the licensing process? The first one relates to public safety, and at the moment in a 10, one relies upon the police reporting or giving a view on public safety. We might have events where the police view is different from the planning view, and without being specific, I'm thinking of situations where we know that the highways have opposed particular sort of developments on the grounds of access to the roads concerned. And that doesn't seem to be knowledge which is necessarily shared with the police or of importance to the police. It seems that they might look at the historical facts regarding sort of accidents on a particular stretch of road, which don't take into account sort of changes to that stretch of road if you suddenly introduce 400 people or 500 people into using that stretch of road. And additionally, it seems foolish to look at a one point on that road where it's the entire road which is part of a system, and we could be looking at roads where they have a very high incidence of crashes. So from my point of view, I'm not particularly satisfied with the view that we exclude road safety. We exclude an independent assessment of road safety. I would like to see the police required to look, to consult with highways who provide a sort of a high level of evidence as to the safety or otherwise of a road. That's sort of my first point. I think road safety in some applications for large events is not given proper consideration if we just rely upon a TMO. And a conversation I had with the TMO was basically that he drove past and it seemed okay. And I think from the point of view of local communities, that's really not sophisticated enough. So that's my first point, really. The second point I wanted to consider was noise itself. Now, as I understand it, noise pollution would seem to me to imply that it's correct for environmental health to consider noise fundamentally when they make their recommendations to the licensing body, because as you pointed out, only the police and only environmental health can make representations to the licensing body of a TEN. And I feel that in my experience, the environmental health have restricted themselves and they haven't considered noise pollution. Their ambit is pollution to look at, but I think myself that noise pollution is as much pollution as any other sort of pollution. I would also go on to kind of refer, I don't want to sound like a certain councillor who we all know who isn't here today, but we could look at the Human Rights Act, and Protocol 1, Article 1 is meant to allow you to, is meant to give you the right to enjoy your property peacefully. And I mention that because as a council, we have an obligation to acknowledge other legislation when we're sort of deliberating upon applications such as this. And I don't see how the process as it's adopted allows us to do that. But that isn't the only bit of legislation to worry about. I might also talk about the Clean Air legislation, the Environmental Protection Act of 1990, the Noise Act of 1996. These are all these are acts, all of which are referred to in the underlying legislation which governs the way we process sort of license applications. And the implication is that we have to consider these. We can't just ignore them. And I just don't see how the current system is doing that. I don't think there was any reference or any consideration of these other sort of pieces of legislation, which we are obliged to kind of pay heed to when we're making decisions.
Okay, You've got 3 points there. I think you ought to give them a chance to.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I
respond.
wasn't quite sure how you wanted to do this. I did.
Well, I think we'd better get rid of the 3 before we
Okay,
go further.
I'm very happy with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I'll answer the last one first. In terms of other legislation, yes, we have to consider other legislation, but it actually, the Licensing Act specifically states if there's more specific legislation to deal with an issue, then it can't be considered as part of the licensing process. So in terms of an event going ahead, it would only be considered on the licensing issues, and any matters such as health and safety, food safety, control of pollution would be picked up under their separate bits of legislation as and when the event was occurring. So yes, we do consider the legislation, but that's considered separately to the Licensing Act and the 10 application. In terms of noise pollution, the environmental health team does consider noise pollution, that they would consider that under the public nuisance consideration. So that they, that is the main thing that they would focus on is noise, and whether that's a public nuisance or going to be a statutory nuisance to neighbours or anybody close by. So that is definitely considered, and my colleagues in CSNN will confirm that. Normally you can't just object to an event because you think there's going to be a problem. You have to have evidence. But in addition to that, you can also ask for noise management plans to be drawn up to ensure that there isn't an occurrence or recurrence of a nuisance. In terms of public safety and accidents on the road, again, this would be for the police to consider. We, as the licensing authority, ask the experts for their information. If you feel the police aren't considering all the information available to them, then that would be a matter to take up with the police. But it certainly, in terms of roads, it would be the Highways Authority that would need to consider this, and they're not classed as a statutory consultee or a responsible authority. So we would rely on the police, and again, they would need evidence to support this. They can't just say, oh, it could be, yes, there's going to be a lot of people, therefore it's going to be a safety risk. They would need evidence to support any objection that they were making. Thank you.
Can I raise some other points, or other people might wish to raise points?
Yes, if it's a new one.
Okay. There is another aspect which I did want to consider, and that's the environment itself. Now, it is possible that sort of big public events might, an application might be made to have them on a site which is actually next to a site of scientific interest. And it might be the case that such a site has large numbers of, let's say, ground nesting birds on it. And there doesn't seem to be any scope to integrate that into our decision-making process. And that's another concern.
You're correct. That's correct. It's not one of the licensing considerations, so it's not something we would consider. I mean, anybody can object and put representations in for normal premises licenses, but that wouldn't be one of the 4 licensing objectives. So it would be classed as we wouldn't be able to accept that because it's not it wouldn't be a valid representation.
Okay, can I talk a little bit about the licensed premises sort of aspect of the licensing regime?
Tom, I hate cutting you off a bit.
No, I'm in your hands, whatever.
Most of this, I understand you've had discussed at a different panel. I think everyone has sympathy with where you want to end up. The problem is we can't do it because the law, the big law, doesn't give us the freedom to make these decisions. Now, the place to argue these points, I think, is with members of Parliament. As I say, I'm absolutely certain from the information that's come to me from other panels and other colleagues, we all, I think, are on your side on this one, but we haven't got the power to do it within the borough, even if we changed our own rules, because we would then still be blocked by what the law says we can do and not do.
I hear what you're saying. My research indicates that sometimes our powers are restricted almost by ourselves. So, for example, when we talk about the licensing regime, we have some flexibility as to who we can recognise as being sort of relevant consultees. So in the underlying legislation, for example, references made to the kind of the planning authority itself would be a relevant body for consulting. But in our own laws, we actually exclude the planning authority. And the planning authority might resolve some of these issues, let's say specifically in terms of the safety of roads issue. I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that was my reading of the primary legislation, that there's a listing.
Paul wants to say something on some of these issues. Paul, all yours.
Thank you very much. This is going to be very controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. A lot of young people like to have parties. They like to have raves. They like to go to big parties where there are 500, 600, even 1,000 people, where there is very loud music playing. They enjoy that sort of thing. If we try and stop them all, they will just go and do it illegally. They will break into a barn, they will break into a factory, they will have a rave illegally. At least if we give them a 10, we can have some control. We can insist they have plans for COVID prevention. They can make sure they have risk assessments, and we can send people in to make sure it happens. And the police will know about it, and they can go and have a look, and our people can go and have a look. We have some control over it. If we just refuse all these things, they'll just go and do it anyway, illegally, and we'll have no control on it whatsoever. Thank you.
I think that's a very good point. But I think the issue is somehow that it leads to saying that if we had a designated area within the borough where such, we would sort of be happy to encourage or tolerate or work with the organisers of such events, that might be some sort of part-time solution. Because I think if you have a situation where it's in the lap of the gods as an application being made in a particular area and then suddenly it occurring, I mean, a specific point is in the case to which I have knowledge of, there was no prior notification of the parish council. And speaking to the officers, I understand that the council's view is that because there isn't a requirement for the council to make notification to parish councils, they don't do that. And I really think, that's pretty appalling. I think the very first thing which we as a borough should be doing is informing our parish councils when these things are proposed. It is an obligation of the legislation. It's a recognition that it's vitally important that people should consult, and we're not going along with that. But I agree with Professor Coons. We all like a party, and I might be a bit old for raving, but hey, who knows? But it's a question of putting these things in the right sort of place. I mean, in the example which we're not talking about, there are local businesses. If you had a local business which is dependent on doing outdoor events such as weddings, it would be rather unfortunate for you if someone was able to operate a legal rave in the field next door to your site. And I sort of think, as a borough councillor, that it is my job to protect people within my ward and protect people within the entire borough. And I would heartily support a system where we sort of had a general indication of areas which were sort of vaguely more acceptable for raves and parties and things like that. Because yeah, you're right, people are going to do it. If you say you can't do it, they're going to do it. If you say you can't do it there, but you can do it there, maybe that's a different sort of thing you're saying to people. And that's the sort of policy I would like to see put forward.
Yeah, I think if we go back to the beginning of what you were saying there, Tom, NIMBYism has crept in. That's the nearest thing to anything. Don't do it here, but do it over there because that won't interfere with me. Now, I know Vicky wants to come in with something on consultations. So Vicky, back to you.
Yeah, it was just to say that we don't exclude anybody from a consultation. All the licensing applications are advertised on our website should people wish to check them, and they're updated regularly through the public access portal. So parish clerks could look at those whenever they wish to. We simply just don't have the resource to send the information out to parish clerks. And in any event, with regards to TENS, the only additional information they'll get is that they know that what is being held within their area, because they're not a statutory consultee in relation to TENS, they wouldn't be able to object. In terms of the Licensing Act, yes, they could make the relevant objections if they wanted to. Again, all this information is freely available on the website under the consultations. So we don't exclude anybody. We just don't write to or email every single person or every single organisation within the borough. We do that in line with what the legislation asks us to do.
I mean, it did seem to me that if a parish council is informed of an event, it can at least make representations to the statutory consultees, be they the police or environmental health. Otherwise, they have no purpose. Otherwise, the system is almost geared up to allowing or almost encouraging events to take place. And these kind of very dire consequences for a local area, very dire indeed, not just at times of pandemic, but generally. And our job is to improve and maintain the life and well-being of our constituents. And it seems to me that we can either roll up and die and say, well, it's up to the big boys, it's NIMBYism and everything like that, or we can say, no, there's a point here. We exist to protect our local communities, and we should explore all avenues which allow us to do that within the law. And we should recognise the absolute right of people to organise events and encourage that. That's what makes makes the borough a good and exciting place. But they have to be in the right sort of place. And I don't see that we've got a system here which does anything towards sort of achieving that. And that worries me a lot. And in a large number of rural areas, it's a huge concern.
I'll just come back on that and reiterate what Councillor Sampson says. This is national legislation. It's permissive legislation, so events are allowed to go ahead with it where no objections are received. It is not within our gift to be able to say, well, we don't think it's suitable for the area. We have to work within the legislation that we're provided. Otherwise, we'd be open to challenge. If we turned around and said, no, we don't like it being held there, we could end up in a judicial review, and it could cost a lot of money to the council, and it would be really bad publicity. So we have to work within the realms of the legislation and what that allows us to do. And like I said, the licensing legislation is meant to be permissive. It's meant to be easy for people to apply and operate businesses.
Well, that's certainly true.
Yeah, Tom, I think
I've said all I can say on the matter.
Yeah, I think you've had your say.
Thank you very much. Yeah, for speak at length. I appreciate it.
Sandra expressed a wish to ask a question a while back.
Thank you, Chair. My question has been answered, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Are there any other questions on this one? No. Okay. Well, in that case, we're not making any recommendations. We're noting what has been said, I think, and hopefully that draws a line under the whole issue until such time as the government decides to do something different.
Chair, can I suggest, is there any merit in the panel setting up a working party to investigate these matters fully and explore where there might be some flexibility in interpretation?
No, there isn't, because we cannot change the national law. The only way we're going to do that is for you to get hold of the MPs and get them to do something about it. We have stretched what we do as much as we can. And we can make all sorts of suggestions and this and that and the other, but we aren't going to change the situation. And the working party would come up with some super ideas, I'm sure, same as we've had today, but they're going nowhere because there's nowhere to put them. So no, we will not be setting up a working party. Joe, you've got a question, I think.
Yes, I mean, I just want to explore a bit further Councillor Reeves' suggestion, because from what he said, there might be some flexibility. And it is an issue. I totally get that the licensing legislation is meant to be permissive, but we have a dual responsibility, don't we? We have a responsibility to try and support and develop and encourage local businesses and entrepreneurship, but we have long-standing residents who also need our help. And Councillor Reeves has pointed out that some of it does appear to be within our grasp. So if that is the case, where would the harm be in setting up an informal working party to explore whether it could be developed and deepened any further?
I think, in fairness, you're kind of underestimating the efforts that our office has put in from both sides of this argument. I don't think they will have missed many tricks along the way. So again, I really don't see any point in setting up a working party to draw the lines and say, this is what we should or shouldn't do, where we know where we are anyway. So for me, that's a dead duck.
Chair, I've put in the chat, I'm not sure whether you've seen, am I allowed to address the panel as the portfolio holder?
I'm always willing to have people address the panel if they've got something. So fire away, Stuart.
Yeah, thank you. I've listened with interest to obviously Tom's questions and Tom's thrust of his argument, and I can see the sentiment behind it and why he's put in place. However, in my involvement in the short time that I've been the portfolio holder with Vicky and the other officers involved, I'm aware of their professionalism and how hard they're working. Now, with the TNOs that we're talking around here, the key bit around the legislation, it is permissive, it is temporary, it's meant to be done with a light touch and quickly. The difficulty is that we've got a paper that's been put in the agenda pack here that actually says within the legislation around it, within the things that we can do, what is being asked for us to do is outside of that legislation. It's also within it, what we're talking around is that there is a piece that we've actually been to our legal people, and their guidance around what the legislation should entitle us to do is also in what is in front of this committee. And in my experience, to actually go against officers and legal advice around putting something in additional is quite a difficult place to put yourself as a counsellor and counsellors. I think the other bit for us is that, and I can understand why Tom and others would maybe want a working group to look at this and explore and challenge what is being presented by our officers and legal. But the difficulty for that is that would require officers from the EHOs and everyone to support that working group. Now, at this moment in time, I am working the EHOs hard around COVID, as is the chief executive. And I don't think the timing would be right, in my respectful submission to you, to have a working group that would put more pressure on their time when we were asking to do something very important around COVID and the current response and marshals and the various other things. But that's all I wanted to say at this point.
Yep, that's fair enough. Again, as I say, I think we are all supporting the general idea, but we haven't got the tools to do anything either from within the law or setting up extra working groups or whatever. We haven't got the resources or the freedom within the law to do it. And as you say, now is not the time to be pushing something that we can't enact. Tom, you want the last word?
Oh, I would never want the last word. But I heard Councillor Stark's, someone's chuckling at me there, cogent argument. And I do understand, these are difficult times, but we also have to look to our future and we can't put everything on the back burner. I'd therefore like to propose a motion that this panel does set up a working group to investigate how we can improve the well-being of people in our borough through a review of 10 and the licensing laws, with an idea for any suggestions or any greater understanding which we might have. I don't know if I might have a seconder for that.
I'm happy to second it.
Thank you.
Okay. Those in favour?
Yeah, shall I do a roll call of members?
Yes, I guess we better had first, yes.
Yeah, so this is to agree whether you want to set up a working group. So it's for, against, or abstain. So Councillor Sampson.
Against.
Councillor Bauer.
Against.
Councillor Bambridge.
Against.
Councillor Bubb.
Against.
Councillor Morley.
Sorry, that came at me as a bit of a surprise. 4.
Councillor Sandra Collop. Councillor Sandra Collop.
Sandra.
Sorry, 4.
Councillor John Collop.
4.
Councillor Kirk.
Against.
Councillor Spikings.
Against.
Councillor Rust.
4.
Councillor Diwali.
4.
And Councillor Rives.
4.
Okay, Chair, that's 6 for and 6 against. So as Chair, you'll have the casting vote.
Gosh, it's happened.
Don't blow it, Colin, don't blow it.
I feared this moment for most of my life when I've been in the committee.
Don't. I've been in it. It's very easy.
Yes, I have to go with my heart, and I am still against.
Correct.
Well done, Colin.
So that doesn't proceed any further. I don't think there's any further discussion. Oh, Vicky would like to say something.
Yeah, just very quickly, I was typing it out as everybody was voting, just to remind members that, you know, when objections and representations are received against the Licensing Act, they come to the subcommittee, and it is you that make the decision. So you're making the decision on behalf of your constituents and behalf of the public and behalf of the borough. So where there is a contentious application, this is heard in front of a panel of your peers. So, you know, we do have the discretion to allow or grant or refuse, and that is made by yourselves. Officers don't do that where the representations are made. Officers present the report and a panel makes that decision. And yet, yes, yeah. Councillor Rust, you can only make the decisions on the four licensing objective. As I explained before, other legislation is considered outside of that in, you know, on the merits. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. I suppose on that basis, we haven't actually had that many contested applications over the years, have we? Otherwise, we'd all be more au fait with it. But,
I think Becky would be able to advise how many hearings we have. It's not, you know, don't want to tempt fate, but it's not, it's, you know, a handful, probably, you know, a few a month or, you know, a few a year. It's not huge amounts. It really just depends on the application and the events that they plan to hold.
Yeah, so there might be a bit more interest in those that come in the future then. With that then, yes, Leslie has just said we now get a list of forthcoming applications so everyone knows what's coming up. So you have time to consider your actions, shall we say. So with that, we'll move on. As usual, the next one is the work programme and forward decisions list. We've got a pretty good work programme. We are working through it slowly but surely. If there are any pressing issues that anyone has got, then we'll take them on board, but I can't promise to deal with them immediately.
Chair, it's now over 3 years since I requested a report on the docks. It's not on the to be scheduled list. It's a big chunk of King's Lynn's physical area. It must be a fairly large employer. It's got traffic coming to it through the town or round the outside of the town. It's still considered live enough to keep the railway lines active, even though the level crossing gates haven't been open for years and are falling apart. They built new large installations there, but we don't know quite what's going on and what's in their minds. I'd love to know.
True. Now, this is actively talked about at the Conservancy Board, where we have the dock manager present, usually. For a long time, we have been trying to get a visit. This last year obviously has blown that one out of the water, literally. It's not been forgotten, Tony, but it's extremely difficult to try and get either someone to come here and talk to us or us to go to them and have a look. But it is actually still quite live. I think Paul might help me and back me up on this one. Maybe next year, if the way the injections work, we might be in a position to get your item moved to the probably.
It depends really. I think it depends, Councillor Burbick, what you really want to know. If it's just sort of statistics of what is being imported and exported, how many ships and this sort of thing, we can certainly find that information, and I'm sure the Colonel myself could give you a short presentation on what's happening at the docks. It's whether you want more detailed information than that. But what is it you're really after?
Well, it's not so much a visit, but it's there. It's one of the biggest thing. In King's Lynn is known as a port, so it's a port. It's one of the things that keeps the town alive. We hear about all sorts of other operations in the borough, one way and another. It's something that affects quite a lot of people one way or another because of the traffic that comes in, because of what goes on in the port, what dangerous things they might be handling that we don't know about. It would just be nice to know what they're doing, what their plans are. I don't necessarily expect a visit to it, though that'd be quite pleasant, but it's something I think we ought to hear about, all councillors, because it affects the whole borough and beyond.
Yeah, fair comment. Leave it with us. We'll have a chat with the powers that be across the road and see what we can set up in terms of further information.
We put heads together on that one, Colin.
Yeah, can do. There was a question about climate change, but I don't think we'll answer that one today because you will be dealing with all sorts of things in the new year, including when you report and all the rest of it. So remember that one, Chris, and bring it up when you form up next year. Right, thank you all very much. That's pretty well it, I think. Our next meeting is the 26th of January. Who knows, by then life might be different, but I wouldn't hold my breath for it somehow. So probably I won't see most of you again before Christmas. So a happy Christmas to all, and a safe Christmas, New Year and beyond. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Colin.
Thank you. Happy Christmas.
Thank you, Chair.
Happy Christmas.
And a rollicking Boxing Day.